In a tense relationship, the reason for a big conflict can be, at first glance, a mere trifle. For example, one random word or a very insignificant act. Now imagine that tensions have developed not between two people, but between entire countries. In this issue of Histographics, we will tell what led to a large-scale international conflict. It was brought to you by an ordinary football match. In 1969, the world was actively preparing for the upcoming 1970 FIFA World Cup. For the first time in history, the plan was to broadcast the games to the national teams in color, which further fueled the interest of the fans. Against this background of football excitement in two neighboring countries of Latin America, El Salvador and Honduras, their own less positive changes took place. The tension that had been building between the two states over the decades has become more noticeable, and there were several reasons for this. El Salvador, several times inferior to Honduras in area, has always been populated more densely. By 1969, it had more than 3 million inhabitants, while the neighboring spacious Honduras had only 2,300,000 inhabitants. The lack of free land, multiplied by the huge number of people in need of said land, led to economic problems, especially when you consider that both Honduras and El Salvador in the late 1960s were still agricultural countries, where most of the population was employed in agriculture. As a result, in the search of a better life, many Salvadorans moved to Honduras. According to various sources, by the end of the 60s, from 100 to 300,000 legal and illegal migrants lived in the country. People lived and worked in the neighboring country for decades, starting families, raising children and grandchildren. However, this was destined to soon end. As hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans crossed the border in hopes of a new life, Honduran discontent grew. The locals believed that migrants were taking away their land, jobs, and hence wealth. Gradually, the indignation turned into strikes. Seeing that the situation was at risk of getting out of control, the government decided that it was time to take action. So, in 1962, began the start of agrarian reforms. In essence, they were to secure the land to those who owned it for at least 5 years before the start of the reform. The law stated that in this case, no one can be deprived of the right of ownership. Nobody except migrants, because the new rule only applied to indigenous Hondurans. In fact, Salvadoran migrants were forced to say goodbye to their lands, which were confiscated in favor of local residents. And, naturally, they did not like it. In addition, the two states had another reason for disputes. El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua have long been unable to agree on who still owns several islands in the Gulf of Fonseca. It was against this backdrop of such growing discontent on both sides that the countries were to meet on the field in qualifying rounds of the FIFA World Cup. Taking into account the fact that neither country had qualified for the championship before, the stakes on these games were very high. The first game took place in the Honduran capital of Tegucigalpa on June 8, 1969. Honduras won 1-0 that day. The only goal of the match was scored in extra time. In this regard, the Salvadorans considered such a victory dishonest and even insulting. They say that one Salvadoran girl even shot herself after learning the outcome of the meeting. After the match, small riots broke out in the city, which soon subsided, but this was only the beginning. The teams had 2 more meetings ahead. The next match took place in a week. On June 15, 1969, the players were hosted by the Salvadoran side at the stadium in the capital, San Salvador. The reception was not the warmest one. On the night before the match, local fans surrounded the hotel where the opposing team was staying. The crowd shouted offensive slogans and threw rotten eggs and dead rats at the windows. The next morning, the Honduran team was transported to the stadium in armored vehicles, accompanied by the army. The riots in the city began even before the start of the game. On the streets, they burned the state flags of Honduras and shouted threats towards the guests of the match. According to various sources, from 1 to 3 people were killed that day. One guy was shot at close range from a passing car when he shouted the slogan, "Long live Honduras!" The Salvadorans have achieved their goal. In the return match, Honduras lost 3-0. However, the team itself considered it a success, and later said that perhaps it saved their lives, because it is not known what scale the riots could have reached if El Salvador lost. After the game, the street clashes continued. The Salvadorans literally pursued Honduran fans who did not have time to leave and attacked them right on the streets. Honduras's response was not long in coming. It began active propaganda aimed at expelling the Salvadorans from the country. The locals have exponentially boycotted any Salvadoran goods and shops. Hundreds of leaflets appeared on trade showcases, windows of houses and cars, urging not to buy anything from migrants. In parallel, the filing of claims began at the highest level. On June 19, 1969, the Honduran foreign minister sent an official letter to his colleague in El Salvador. In it, the representative of the authorities firmly stated that Honduras demands an investigation into the situation with attacks on its citizens in the Salvadoran capital and will not tolerate such an attitude. The minister noted that no attempt was made from the Salvadoran side to stop the violence and ensure the safety of the guests. The answer was given soon. The Salvadoran minister sent a letter to Honduras with opposite claims. He noted that against the background of the flaring football conflicts, innocent citizens of El Salvador living in Honduras are becoming victims of systemic harassment and attacks. The minister also called on the country to take action and stop the violence. But simple correspondence, albeit at the highest level, did not help change the situation. The attacks on the Salvadorans became more and more brutal with each passing day. Now Hondurans weren't just boycotting their neighbors' goods. Large crowds of people destroyed and ravaged shops selling products from El Salvador. Local residents forcibly dragged the Salvadorans out of their houses and beat them. The citizens of El Salvador began to flee en masse back to their homeland. Many of them had to walk to the border from different cities of Honduras, so they took only the most necessary things with them, leaving behind the property they had acquired over the years. According to some reports, about 1,400 people crossed the border between El Salvador and Honduras every day. By the end of June 1969, from 10 to 12,000 citizens returned to El Salvador. The Salvadoran government officially accused Honduras of organizing genocide against its citizens. In search of justice, El Salvador turned to the Organization of American States and demanded immediate intervention. But this did not work. While the situation between the two countries was heating up, their teams were preparing for the decisive match of the qualifying stage. The game was scheduled for June 26, 1969. This time, both teams were hosted by the Mexican capital, Mexico City. Soon after the starting whistle, El Salvador officially announced the severance of diplomatic relations with Honduras. The country explained this by the fact that no action was taken by Honduras to investigate the genocide and punish those responsible. Against the background of global political changes, the game on the field will still go on. The players did not yet suspect what responsibility lay on each of them in connection with the changes. Now, for each side, winning this match was not just a sporting event, but a matter of honor. El Salvador scored his last goal in extra time, beating Honduras 3-2. The country secured its entry into the main stage of the 1970 FIFA World Cup. At the same time, it took a step closer to an imminent war. The loss of Honduras only increased the hatred of its inhabitants toward the Salvadorans. The tension between the countries grew every day. As a result, on July 14, 1969, Salvadoran military aircraft invaded Honduras. The Football War was the last international conflict in which old American fighters from the Second World War took part. They began bombing the capital's airport and 7 cities in the country. Airstrikes were carried out on the settlements Choluteca, Santa Rosa de Copan, Catacamas, Nueva Octopec, Amapala, and Jericala, Nacaome. In response, Honduras dispatched its air force to El Salvador in order to immediately strike the strategically important targets. The bombs were dropped at the Acajulta oil refinery, the Port Cutico oil refinery, and the military base near Tlapango. Honduras proved to be more successful in the skies than on the football field, and soon many of El Salvador's fighters were hit. However, in parallel, the offensive was on the ground, and here the ground forces of El Salvador, equipped with a good arsenal of weapons and armored vehicles, turned out to be stronger. In a day, the offensive advanced almost to the Honduran capital of Tegucigalpa. On July 15th, the Organization of American States convened an emergency meeting. El Salvador was asked to withdraw its troops from Honduras, but no action on the part of the instigator of the military conflict followed. The crisis was resolved only by July 18th, when the parties agreed on a ceasefire. Thus, this short-term war lasted almost 100 hours, which made it known in history under another name, 100-Hour War. The conflict was officially ended on July 20th at 2200 hours. But El Salvador refused to withdraw its troops immediately. Under international pressure, the soldiers left Honduras only on the 2nd of August. This short but bloody war killed between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers and civilians on both sides. About 15,000 people were injured. In addition, a huge number of Salvadorans, from 60 to 130,000, were forcibly deported from Honduras. Such a sharp increase in population, which occurred in parallel with the hostilities, plunged El Salvador into a protracted economic crisis and led to a 12-year civil war. Despite the de facto ceasefire, tensions between the two states persisted for many years. An official peace treaty was signed only in October 1980. According to many experts, of course, football itself was not the cause of this war. It was already inevitable. But it was football matches that noticeably fueled the emotions of the residents of both countries and accelerated the outbreak of hostilities. What do you think? Would the war between El Salvador and Honduras have started if not for those fateful football matches? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget about likes and subscriptions. See you!